Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Deborah Scheffel, and as Jeff nicely introduced me, I'm Dean of the School of Education here at CCU and also serve on the State Board of Education. I'd like to thank Jeff for putting this panel together. It's wonderful to serve with all these other well-prepared and robust panel participants. How many educators do we have in the room? People that are in education? Very many. Excellent. Thank you for coming. I'd like to say that first and foremost, I'm an educator. I started out teaching in Douglas County as a teacher of students with special needs, and I've done worked in many schools and also done a lot of work in teacher preparation to prepare teachers to be successful, to go in every classroom and work with every child so that they can fulfill their potential. So I have a great heart for kids, for education, and for those teachers that love other people's children every day and do a wonderful job, and I appreciate the teaching profession so very much. It impacts our state and our nation in profound ways. I'd like to, when we think just of the critique of government-run education, much of it has really circled around two concepts. One is inequality of opportunity, and the second one is the burden of bureaucracy. Since the 1950s, the federal government has tried to achieve equity in programs that have been very expensive, such as Head Start, Title I, special education, but we still have very problematic achievement levels for kids in Colorado and across the nation. The National Assessment of Educational Progress estimates that 63% of fourth graders perform at a basic or below basic level in reading, and 69% achieve at those same levels in mathematics. So we're spending a lot on education, and we're not getting what we really need in many cases for those dollars. The second criticism is often around the idea of layers of bureaucracy, so that schools are burdened by paperwork, regulation, and often that tends to be tied to agendas of many stakeholders with diverse priorities, and that can lead to real fragmentation in education. Of course, we know that the ground for government participation in education is very historic. You know, we want general education for good citizenship. A stable and democratic society is not really possible without widespread acceptance of some common sets of values. Our question is, are we getting that through our education system? And then a minimum degree of literacy so that citizens have knowledge and skills to make good choices when it comes to voting. And the gain is, you know, to the family, to the child, and certainly to society as a whole. But the question is around the role of government, the extent to which, and how do they administer and finance education. So when I think of three challenges, the first is a heavy regulatory and compliance burden. The system is often not set up, in spite of many wonderful teachers in the system of education. As Jeff said, 80% of our students go to traditional schools. And so who is teaching them? Many wonderful teachers. But the system itself is set up with a very heavy regulatory burden that often is compliance-driven and not quality-driven to meet the needs of individual students. The federal and state agencies have often been referred to as the fourth branch of government. If you look at the Department of Education in Colorado alone and look at the number of full-time equivalent people that work there, it's grown exponentially over the last 10 years, tracking the legislation that's been passed in Colorado, so that there's just lots of people that need to administer those laws. So the regulatory burden is problematic. When we look back to the original Department of Education at the federal level, before it was a cabinet level entity in 1867, it was merely designed to collect information and be about research and development, what works. But since then, it's had a very heavy regulatory impact, particularly due to Title I funding through the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act, federal aid to disadvantaged students, and now the Department of Education has the third largest budget in the federal government, second only to Defense and Health and Human Services. So it has a huge impact in terms of regulatory burden, and it often weighs down the system in ways that don't translate into great outcomes for our students, as we see with the data, achievement data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Secondly, centralization. Over the past 100 years, in 1939, for example, we had 117,000 school districts. By 2006, only 13,000 school districts. What has happened? We've had huge centralization of our education system. So we have decisions being made not close to the site of change, but in huge districts where parental voices often get drowned out by other voices. And this centralization tendency has not translated into good outcomes, and there's not great evidence that it works. And so more independent schools, more parental voice, more authority in the hands of parents who know best the needs of their students, a wider array of options, a more dynamic system really meets the needs of our students in a much better way than this centralization tendency that we're engaged in right now. And the Common Core has been a great example of that we hope to, maybe we can speak about later. The third issue with respect to a challenge with government-run schools is this idea of competition and choice, and the idea that we really don't have enough of it, many feel. We can estimate that there are 40,000 students in Colorado alone on wait lists for charter schools. What does that tell you? It tells you that parents want options for their kids, and we know that what works in 5th grade doesn't work in high school. I have a number of nieces and nephews that have moved in and out of the system in various types of schools, different genres, service delivery models to meet needs based on where they're at, and to have a system that's unitary, homogeneous, and really aiming toward the middle does not meet the needs of our kids. So I think these are some challenges that we need to address. Jeff has suggested some ways that we can think about that, and I'll turn it over now to Derek to talk a little bit about his experience. So thanks again for being here tonight.